The town of Oakhaven was ancient. It lay nestled beside a forest. This was no ordinary forest. Locals called it the Whispering Woods. They spoke of it in hushed tones. They knew its secrets were best left undisturbed. The forest was alive, not with birdsong or rustling leaves. It was alive with whispers. Whispers that chilled the bone and haunted the soul. For generations, the people of Oakhaven had coexisted with the woods. They respected its boundaries. They heeded the warnings whispered through the ages. Stay clear, do not enter. These whispers were more than just folklore. They were the forest's way of protecting itself and those who dared to enter. The trees themselves were unusual. Their bark was a sickly grey. It looked almost like human skin. The branches were gnarled and twisted. They resembled grasping claws. The leaves were a deep, unsettling shade of green. They seemed to absorb the light, leaving the forest floor in perpetual twilight. This was a place of shadows and secrets. It was a place where fear took root and flourished. The sun was already beginning its descent as Mark entered the forest. The light, already feeble, struggled to penetrate the dense canopy. The air grew noticeably colder. It was as though the forest itself was drawing the warmth from him. The leaves underfoot were damp and spongy. They released a musty odor that clung to his clothes. He walked deeper, the town quickly fading from view. He was surrounded by an unnatural silence. There were no birds singing, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. Only the sound of his own footsteps broke the silence. It was an unsettling quiet. It amplified every rustle, every snap of a twig. He tried to convince himself that there was nothing to fear. It was just a forest. It was darker and quieter than most, but it was still just a forest. Yet, deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. It was growing steadily with every step he took. The forest was watching him. He could feel its presence closing in. As Mark ventured deeper into the woods, he noticed a change. The trees seemed to lean towards him. It was as if they were watching his every move. Their branches, twisted and gnarled, reached out like skeletal fingers. They were trying to touch him. He paused, his heart pounding in his chest. Was it his imagination, or had the trees actually moved? He couldn't be sure, but he felt a shiver run down his spine. He quickened his pace, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere. But the forest seemed to be closing in around him. The air grew thick with a strange energy. He could feel it prickling at his skin. It was then that he heard it, a whisper, faint at first. It seemed to come from the trees themselves. The whispers grew louder as Mark pressed on. They seemed to be coming from all directions. They were faint, sibilant murmurs just on the edge of comprehension. He couldn't make out any distinct words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was menacing. It was filled with malice. Fear coiled in his gut, cold and tight. He stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He strained to listen, his senses on high alert. The whispers seemed to be swirling around him. They were like snakes, slithering through the undergrowth. They were closing in on him. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. The only answer was a chorus of whispers. They seemed to mock his fear. He was surrounded. There was no escape. Panic welled up inside Mark. He had to get out of the woods. He had to escape the whispers. He broke into a run, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, but the forest seemed to be working against him. The trees shifted, their branches intertwining overhead. They created a labyrinth with no visible exit. Paths that seemed clear a moment ago led to dead ends. Every turn he made only took him deeper into the heart of the woods. The whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of sound that pressed in on him from all sides. They were no longer faint murmurs. They were guttural hisses filled with rage and hunger. He could feel their icy breath on the back of his neck. He could almost feel their unseen hands reaching out to grasp him. Just when Mark felt like he could take no more, he saw it. A light. It was faint, but it was unmistakable. It flickered through the trees ahead. Hope surged through him. He stumbled towards it, his legs heavy with fatigue and fear. As he drew closer, he realized the light came from a lantern. It was hanging from a low-hanging branch. It swayed gently, casting eerie shadows that danced around him. He reached out and grabbed the lantern. He held it aloft. Its warm glow pushed back the oppressive darkness. It provided a small measure of comfort. He examined his surroundings. He realized with a sinking heart that he was still trapped. The trees pressed in on all sides. The whispers continued, though they seemed a little more subdued. They were wary of the light. With a newfound determination, Mark continued onward. He used the lantern to guide his way. He prayed that it would lead him out of the maze. He walked for what felt like hours. The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly. Then he heard it, a low growl. It came from somewhere behind him. He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. He lifted the lantern. Its light revealed nothing but trees. But he could sense something watching him. He could feel its hot, fetid breath on his skin. He started to run. The growl echoed behind him, closer now. He didn't dare look back. He knew that whatever was chasing him was gaining on him. He could hear the sound of its heavy footsteps pounding the forest floor. He could hear the snapping of twigs as it crashed through the undergrowth. The trees finally began to thin. He burst out of the forest edge. He stumbled onto the road. He was greeted by the sight of the moon, hanging high in the night sky. He collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. He was free. He had escaped the whispering woods. He lay there for a moment, catching his breath. He listened. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. The silence was welcome. It was a blessed relief after the cacophony of the woods. He looked back at the forest, its dark silhouette looming against the horizon. He shuddered, remembering the horrors he had endured. Mark never fully recovered from his experience in the Whispering Woods. He carried the trauma with him. It was a heavy weight on his soul. He tried to forget the whispers. They haunted his dreams. They taunted him with their malice. They reminded him of the forest's power. He often found himself drawn back to Oakhaven. He would stand at the edge of the woods. He would stare into its depths. He would listen for the whispers. He knew that he would never be truly free of them. They were a part of him now. They were a part of his past. They were a part of who he was. The Whispering Woods remained unchanged. They stood as a silent sentinel at the edge of town. They waited patiently for their next victim. Their whispers echoed through the trees. They beckoned the curious. They lured the unsuspecting. They promised secrets. They threatened doom. The forest held its secrets close. They waited for those brave enough or foolish enough to venture within their grasp. The woods were always waiting. They were always listening. They were always watching.